So it is that time of year again where I have a brand new list of 5 fantasy romance recommendations for you guys. This does actually seem to only happen annually, which I don't intend it to be that way, but every time I have 5 fantasy romance recommendations for you guys, I bring you one of these videos. So these ones I feel are a little bit different than normal in that we have more than one of these have dystopian themes. One of them leans very paranormal, which is unusual for me, and one of them is like more urban fantasy. But we're just gonna get stuck into it. I'll make a playlist of all of my fantasy romance recommendations and put it in the description box if you guys want more than this video. But we are going to be starting off with the one that's most on brand for me, which is the high fantasy romance, and that is House of Beating Hearts by Olivia Wildenstein. This is the first book in what I think is a trilogy, and I have read the first 2 books. I believe that there is a novella as well that I haven't read yet, and the 3rd book is going to be coming out later this year. But this is one that I picked up because Olivia Wildenstein is an author who is going to be at Rare, which is a romance festival that I attend this year's is going to be in London, and I picked her books up not really knowing much about them or expecting anything from them. And I do have to say that this one, it took me a little bit of a while to get into, but by the time I hit, I want to say like the 40% mark, I was thoroughly invested, so much so that I pretty much just picked up the sequel directly afterwards. So this one is a fairy romance. There's not just fairies in here, but our main character lives in a world of fae, and the fae are very oppressive towards everybody else, including the half fae, which our main character is, and also the humans, which are treated terribly. Throughout the course of the book, you also find out that there are a race of crow people that used to exist in the world, and also a race of sorceresses, and these are also very much looked down upon by the fae. So our main character is half fae, and her grandmother and her mother were cast out by the rest of their family because when her mother fell pregnant and decided to keep her child, her grandmother kind of like sided with them, and everybody else like wanted nothing to do with her because it brought shame upon the family. So there is like a love triangle going on in here because one of the love interests is the fae prince, who has been at war for the last 4 years, but they're like childhood best friends, and he's come back, and the first thing, like one of the first things he does is calls upon the main character Luce. And then the other love interest is a fae fisherman who, you know what, Anthony's pretty hot. Like I would get on that ship in a heartbeat. But one day the main character Luce is attending a party in the area where the humans live when she's pulled aside by a oracle who tells her that she will be the next queen, like she will be the queen of the land if she collects, I think is it 5 iron crows, and she takes this to mean that she's then going to marry the fae prince. So she goes along with it to do it for him because it's his brother who's currently the king. Even though she doesn't know what this mission is, she kind of just takes it on faith that she's going to marry this prince and heads off in the world to accomplish that task. As you may be able to tell from my like little synopsis there is a lot going on in this plot, and I feel like that really contributed to the fact that it took me about 40% to get into this, because it's just like it could be more cohesive essentially, which is my biggest criticism of it. But when I got to that 30-40% mark, I just started eating this up and I could not put it down. It reminded me a lot of like the Plated Prisoner series by Raven Kennedy, especially in like how you're getting a ton of red flags, especially throughout the beginning of this first book. And it also had little inklings there of Fortuna Swan for me, particularly in how we have the fairies and then we have a few other types of magical creature in there as well. But I would say in terms of romance and setup, it's, if you like Plated Prisoner, then I'd recommend maybe giving this one a go. I believe that I gave books 1 and 2 4 stars each, and it was really good, you know, just to go into a book that you expected, that I expected nothing from, and to end up really enjoying it. And then for me as well, this one was available on Kindle Unlimited, which is how I read it. Moving on to the next one that I don't own physically, because that's the one that I'm most likely to forget. You will have seen me talk about this because I did read it before October last year, because it was in a spooky fantasy romance recommendations video that I did, but it was also one of my favorite books of the year, and that one is Her Soul to Take by Harley LaRue. And this is the one that skews a little bit more paranormal that I'm usually comfortable with, because I'm not a big paranormal romance girly. But this one is following a young woman who I believe is called Ray, and she is heading back to the town that her family are from. Like, she was born there, but she moved away when she was very young, and she also has a paranormal investigation YouTube channel, but she's sick of people like performing fake investigations and doing like jump scary, like gimmicky stuff for views, because she actually takes this seriously. So in this town that she's moving to, there's actually this influential family that have been sacrificing townspeople to a slumbering god beneath the town in order to eventually like raise the god into power. And our main character finds herself in possession of this grimoire that the influential family have been using to control a demon called Leon. So she takes this grimoire, doesn't really think anything of it, and she finally succumbs to the urge to do something gimmicky for views, and she performs a demon summoning, not expecting anything to work, but lo and behold, Leon pops up. So Leon questions like how she had the ability to summon him, like why she has the grimoire, and he asks for it because when he has that grimoire, he will then also earn his freedom, only to find out that she no longer has it, like it's been stolen or it's gone missing. And together they hunt down this grimoire so Leon can have his freedom, and so that the townspeople will stop being sacrificed because this influential family won't have a demon to do their bidding. I really enjoyed this. It is like, look at the kink list for any Harley LaRue book that you pick up, because it does stray into BDSM a little bit, and this one in particular I feel has like consensual non-consent and also like domination and submission in it. So I would, like, Harley LaRue books are kinky, so I would recommend looking up a full kink list before you go into this. But the smut was on point, and something that I did really love about it is that it did actually feel like it had a plot and it just wasn't like smut for the sake of it being smutty. My absolute favorite thing about this is that it brought all of the things that I loved in paranormal romance when I was a teenager into a story for adults, and like atmospherically it reminded me a lot, like especially at the beginning, of Bella Swan arriving at Forks, of Nora in Hush Hush. The setting and the atmosphere was very much given like Forks, and I really loved that about this, because it brought it to a place of nostalgia for me, but then combined that with things that I love and I read now, because I would never pick up like a paranormal romance in the style of what I used to read. So I like that it combined things that I really loved about the genre with things that I really love now. My one kind of flaw with this one, I would say, is that I haven't read the second book yet, but with the way this book reads, it feels like the books in the series that all follow different couples are kind of moving alongside each other, so it feels like you're missing information. It's a little bit incomplete because there's things potentially happening at the same time from a different character's perspective, which would then be in a different book, if that makes sense. So moving on to the ones that I do own, we will crack on, I guess, with the ones that have slight dystopian elements. The first one is straight up dystopian, and that is Pestilence by Laura Thalassa, or the Four Horsemen series. I did read the entirety of this series towards the latter end of 2022, as I have a Patreon fantasy romance book club where we do read-alongs of series, and this was the one that we started with. So typically in these videos I only recommend you guys 4 and 5 star reads. I will say that this series is very up and down for me. I give the first book 3 stars, the second 4, the third 2, and then the last one was also 4. But I do think that this is a really good time if you don't take it too seriously, because if you do, the whole thing just falls apart. But I really love Laura Thalassa in general, because she wrote The Bargainer, which is one of my favorite fantasy romance series, and also, was it the second indie fantasy romance series that I read. But this one is very different. We are following each of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse as they come down to Earth to bring about the end of days, and along the way they all meet human women who temper them. So it's kind of formulaic, especially the first 3 books I would say are very repetitive and follow the same kind of formula, but it's also like, it's kind of a good time, especially with Pestilence. The one thing I would say about Pestilence is that it is a good time. Now, going into this, you have to know that these are the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse and they take their job very seriously. So there is like widespread annihilation of the population, and they are doing this unapologetically because it's kind of like their divine mission. So you see this predominantly from the perspective of our main characters. In this instance, it is a firefighter who has been left behind to kill him, and this is our introduction into the horsemen, where like we don't know that they're immortal and that they, well, I mean, we do, none of the humans do, but they're immortal and they just really can't be killed. So she stays behind and tries to kill him, but he just comes back to life and ends up taking her with him as he continues to bring about the apocalypse. This one I think was probably the hardest one to read for me in terms of the type of horseman that Pestilence is, because you see people become sick, and like sickness is something, I have health anxiety, which doesn't help, and it didn't trigger me in that way, but I think in terms of humanity, like sickness is something that we constantly struggle with. Like the chances are that in our lifetimes we are all going to watch somebody we love die of sickness. So this one in particular I feel was particularly poignant in that element, and so you have to have a little bit of a suspension of disbelief when it turns around to a romance, because our main character is watching people die in these horrible ways, but still it comes around to like a position of romance. The one thing about Pestilence as well that made me really enjoy this one is that it was just fun. If you go in with an open mind, knowing they're a horseman of the apocalypse, knowing you're gonna see some like horrific stuff, and don't think about like how realistic this actually is, it's actually kind of fun, and I had a good time with this one. My favorite in the series is 100% Death though. I really liked his unique take on his mission and why he does the things he does and why he's so unapologetic about it. And I also think that it had some really nice imagery and parallels between our main character Lazarus and Death as a love interest. The other one that has, this one I would say is fantasy romance, but it has like a very dystopian feel to it, is Savage Lands by Stacey Marie Brown. So this one is once again a fae romance. I have a type, guys. Fae is my fave. That would be a good slogan. But this one is following a human girl who is the daughter of this like notorious general who died. He died either during or shortly after the Fae Wars, which is when humans and Fae were at war. She was actually born at the moment that the veil between the worlds of the human and the Fae fell. But regardless, she's ended up as an orphan and she's now the ward of the king. But she's fallen in love with her best friend, who is the prince, because of course she has. They can obviously never be together because the prince's job is to like further political connections and have like a marriage of allegiance, and the main character also as the ward of the king has a very similar role. So our main character Brexley is also obviously in this position of privilege, and to help the like I guess the regular people, she for some reason thinks it's a good idea to steal drugs from trains that move them throughout the city. This is the city of Budapest, and she steals drugs to put them on the black market and keep them out of the hands of the elite, so the money trickles into the regular people instead of it just like going to the elite and making the rich more rich. One night when she's doing this, she doesn't get off the train quickly enough and she's caught at the checkpoint between the Fae and human areas of the city, and she is thrown into this brutal Fae prison where she meets this, he's a war legend. He fought on the side of the Fae in the Fae Wars and he's notorious, and he's called Warwick Farkas. He's Jason Momoa. He's 100% Jason Momoa. So one thing I will say about this is that it is brutal, it is dark, especially in these elements of the prison. Like it has a very dirty, gritty, dark, urban feel to this, and it also generally, because it's set in our world but like an altered version of our world, it does have that very dystopian feel to it. Something that I really loved about this is that it's actually just really addictive. It's one of those where I would not say this is the best fantasy romance I've ever read, but I will say that it's a very, very addictive read. It reminds me a lot of Jennifer L. Armentrout in that way actually, because with every single Blood and Ash book that I read, I spend 400 pages thinking that it's not that good, and then the last like 100 to 50 pages are like 5-star material, and you just like, you're desperate to get your hands on the next book in the series. These are very much like that in terms of addiction level. I will say that they are kind of formulaic. Like the amount of times that an explosion gets the main characters out of a sticky situation, I don't think I could count on my hands at this point. It is a very much like a go-to plot device in this series, but I think that it is, in terms of addiction, like if you are struggling to get out of a slump, this one might be a good one to pick up, because while the beginning of these books are a lot slower, they're actually very, very short. I think there's only one book in this series that's a significant like thickness. This one, for example, is 366 pages, which is really reasonable. And when you get like halfway through, it's when the pace, like when you really start to get into it and the pace really, really picks up. And then the final one that I have to recommend to you guys today is another 3-star read. And this one, I have to say, I had a really, really good time with it, but I do think it's flawed, and that's why I can't give it any more than 3 stars. But enjoyment level, I would say it's definitely a 4, and that is A Touch of Darkness by Scarlett St. Clair. This one is the first book in the Hades and Persephone series, and it is a urban fantasy because it's in like an alternate history version of our world where like the Greek gods came down to earth, rearranged the continents, and while it's modern day now, it's not our world that we live in, even though a lot is the same. So like the city in here is New Athens, and Hades has a gambling empire. Like he runs a club, like an exclusive nightclub that's invitation only, and upstairs he makes bargains with mortals. Now the main character Persephone thinks this is immoral, and she has come to the city of New Athens to study against her mother's wishes, and she has a internship at a news company called New Athens News. And when her roommate gets an invitation invitation to Hades' club and invites Persephone to go along with her. Persephone decides that she actually wants to investigate Hades. Persephone goes along to this club and she meets this mysterious guy who says that he'll teach her how to play poker, and while he's teaching her and they're playing, she's obviously losing because she doesn't know how to play, and afterwards he reveals that he's Hades and he ties her into this bargain where she has to create life in the underworld, otherwise she has to live in the underworld with Hades forever. This is a very difficult bargain for Persephone to fulfill because she actually doesn't possess the goddess of spring powers that she's promised. Everything she touches withers and dies. So this was like, I've heard some really negative things about this series, mainly based on the decisions that Persephone makes and how they're not the best. Like, she doesn't think through her decisions and they don't make a whole ton of sense. I actually honestly didn't think she was that bad. I've read much worse, essentially. So that wasn't an issue for me. And I really loved how quickly I sunk into this world. If you read Lore Olympus, which is another one of my fantasy romance recommendations, it's a Hades and Persephone webcomic. I feel like this kind of reads like a novelization of that. Lore Olympus is much sweeter, I would say, but this, like with the setting and the side characters, like the gods and goddesses that form the side characters of this story, very much felt like Lore Olympus to me, which helped me to sink into this story really easily. And also the fact that obviously like it's pretty much a contemporary fantasy, so it's not overtly fantastical, really helped. I loved Hades. Hades is a bougie king always, and we love that for him. And I didn't really mind following Persephone, so I had a really good time with this and I found it to be really immersive, but there's a lot of plot points in here that are just dead end and don't pick up. Like, there is one scene where Persephone is attending a ball and she wants to avoid her mother, so she mentions to Hecate that she wants to do that, and Hecate says that she'll get her a mask. So this mask turns up and Persephone puts it on, and Demeter enters the ball looking angry. Never mentions why. Never picks up again why Demeter's angry. And also Persephone puts on this mask and successfully avoids Demeter, but it never says why. Like, is it just because she's wearing a mask? Is it because Demeter never saw her, because Demeter's actually never mentioned past that scene where she's introduced? Or is it because the mask is magical? We'll never know. And all that scene needed really to make it more realistic was for Persephone to see Demeter across the room and be like, I have to avoid my mother, and kind of like turn around and go the other way. So there's lots of instances like this where plot lines are introduced and they kind of just dead end into nothing. So I feel like in good conscience I couldn't rate this any higher than a 3. But that being said, I very much enjoyed it. Now, the reading order of this series is that you go from A Touch of Darkness into whatever the first book in the series from Hades' perspective is, and I believe that you alternate between the two. So you read one book from Persephone and one from Hades as you make your way through the series. So I guess stay tuned to find out how I feel when I continue this, because while I'm very interested in continuing, I have 100% been burned by books from the love interest perspective before, which has really, like, I'm very cautious progressing with this series because of that, because I don't just want the same story from Hades' perspective. That's not really very interesting to me. So there you have 5 brand new from me. They're not brand new books, they're brand new recommendations from me to you. Do stay tuned if you want more. You know, I'm always reading and recommending fantasy romance, and hopefully it won't be a year until my next one. I do already have one that I'm currently reading that I'm pretty sure is going to be the first book in our next fantasy romance recommendations video. So yeah, do stay tuned for fantasy romance content if that's something that you're interested in. And also, if you're interested in fantasy and romance content, I'm your girl for that as well. But down in the comments, leave fantasy romance recommendations. I know y'all are going to want me to read Carissa Broadbent, and I'm going to get there, okay? I'm going to get there. But specifically, leave me recommendations based on the books that I've recommended in this video today, so myself and other people who have potentially read the books that I've recommended can find some new fantasy romance books to read. But aside from that, guys, please don't forget to like this video if you liked it, and subscribe if you wanna. If you head to my description box, you'll find links to my Goodreads, Instagram and Twitter if you'd like to follow me on any of those, as well as a link to my Bookish candle website, the Etsy for that, and a 10% off discount code. But that's it from me today, guys. Bye!
Oh, you bite your friend like chocolate. You say you're a go when nobody knows, with guns hidden under our petticoats. We're never gonna quit it, no, we're never gonna quit it, no.